This is the Windows Phone Learning Design Reviews. I'm Lincoln Anderson with 352 Media Group, and we're out of Florida where it is very cold today. It got down to 62 degrees, so I've got my sweatshirt and a hot cider, and I'm ready to go. So I've got, I think 6 or 7 apps to look at today. And some of them are pretty interesting. So we're going to just talk about the Microsoft Design Language, just modern UI design on Windows Phone, and also just general design tips and ideas that I have along the way. So the first app that we're going to look at is called Skateboard Skill Checker. And this is a really unique idea. It's really a supporting app. It connects your phone over Bluetooth to a gadget. It has an accelerometer on it, and you attach it to a skateboard, and it can actually detect tricks that you're doing, and also works with GPS to determine where you are, and kind of has a social networking aspect to it. So this is the app you would install as the companion app on your phone. So there's a few screens. I'm just going to dive into one right now, and then we'll kind of zoom out to look at the more of the bigger picture. But I just wanted to take a look at this location screen. This is just where you can see where certain tricks were performed and where they were performed on a Bing map. And I think this is a really crisp screen. It serves the purpose of showing you visually on a map where these things are. It's taking up a good amount of room on the screen so that you can get a context for the areas that you're looking at. You're not just looking at a couple of roads, but you can see everything. And also, it's really highlighted down below. There's a hierarchy to the information, the location and the points and the time, kind of top down. What is the most important information to the least important information? One thing that I would change on the screen are the app bar buttons down below. I don't know if this app is just in the design stage or this is actually something that is in development right now. I'm just looking at an image right now. It could be a screenshot or just a comp. But you'll notice that the icons down below are bigger than they should be. The search button looks close to being okay, but if you see the refresh button, the first one in the app bar down below, it's actually touching the outside edge because it's just bigger than it should be. So if you're just using the characters in your app bar buttons, you probably won't run into this issue. But if you study just the general size of icons that are used in the app bar, and also on tiles and stuff too, you'll notice some similarities between them, just some consistent themes. And one of those is the padding between the edge of the item and then the icon itself. So you just want to make sure that there's a healthy amount of padding there. You can kind of, as a general rule of thumb, the dimensions of the icon, or just height and width, are usually about half of the containing element. But that varies just based on whether the icon is circular or if it's square, or what just the shape of it is. But certainly, if the icon is touching the outer edge or close to it, it just looks kind of broken. So zooming out, this is the panorama screen for this app. So this is what you'd be looking at one slice of this at a time as you panned through it. So my first impression looking at this screen is, wow, there's a lot of stuff going on. It's busy and it's very noisy. There's a lot of information in this app. There's statistics on your tricks and where you need to improve and whatnot. There's also what your friends are doing. There's just a lot of information. But there's aspects that are not helping to kind of make that clean and easy to understand. So I'm just going to kind of go through some things one by one. First thing I'm going to talk about is the background photo. It's recommended that if you want the cleanest app possible, that you just use a flat background color, black or white, depending on the user's theme. But sometimes if you want your app to have some personality or some attitude or something to it, you might want to add a background image. I think, this background image is interesting because it's, it's an actual location that you could be in, and it's got this urban setting. So instead of just being a texture, like cement or something, it's actually kind of interesting. But I wanted to I made these 3 graphics just as a comparison. These aren't part of the app submission. These are just things that I made. The large image you could kind of compare to what we're looking at in the panorama. The text on it is really hard to read because there's a lot of visual fidelity in the image, and also the colors don't contrast that well. There's a lot of white in the background. There's a lot of very distinct shapes, high color saturation. So this is what we would call noise. There's a lot of noise behind the text, and so it's really hard to read. So over on the right are some techniques that you can think about using to still use a photo, but just make text easier to read on it. The first one is just giving it a soft focus effect by just blurring the image. This doesn't work as well with a photo like this, where the interest is in the detail. You can imagine if your photo was like of a sky or like a landscape or something, or like a mountain, maybe soft focus would make more sense because you could still get the gist of what the photo was, but the text still pops against the background. The second one is just darkening the background, and this is I would actually recommend to this designer to go in this route because you can have a dark or light background, or black or white background, depending on the user's theme preference. And then you can just have an opacity on the image itself, just to have something a little bit interesting in the background, but still have that contrast, the light text on the dark background or the dark text on the light background. So that's one thing to think about. And as we flip back to the panorama here, you can see how, looking at the title especially, and some of the subtitles in the panorama, you can see how the text is just really hard to read against that background. Looking at the icons, I would take, first of all, the circle button icons on the first 2 sections, the little menu up front, and then the game section. I would have the icon come before the text. So you see the icon, at a quick glance, you can kind of understand it's the icon and then the label for it. And just align everything to the left. And I think that if you do something different with the background to create higher visibility of the visual elements on it, you won't need all these boxes, all these blue and green and red and black stripes. All of this is kind of adding to how busy this page looks. And so I think if the text and icon and everything is visible against the background, you won't need those containing elements, which are not really part of the visual language of the phone. And also they just look kind of weird because the text at times is really butted up against the containing element. So like if you look at the word play, the very first word there, left, play, is in that blue box, but there's like no margin between the letters and the edge of the box. So it just feels very crowded. It just feels very compact. So if you can, I would just get rid of those background colors. The other thing, looking at the icons on the right side of the screen, you can see there are some inconsistencies. So I'll just kind of look at them one by one. And the first one is like a skateboard. This is under settings, under connectivity. There's a red tile, and there's a skateboard with like a Wi-Fi signal coming off of it. So the skateboard, again, is touching the edge of tile, so it just looks cramped, and there's no other icons. There's no other tile icons that do that on the phone, so it just looks kind of weird and out of place. Underneath that, there's a skateboard. I think the skateboard by itself looks fine, but it's got these red graphic EQ type of switches on it, and that's using like multiple colors like that usually isn't a style on the phone. It doesn't really help visibility. I had to stop and actually study that to understand what I was looking at. Thought it was some weird kind of skateboard with like tassels hanging off the bottom or something. So if you study the Seago symbol set and the icon set, you'll notice certain patterns. Like they're all red, they're one color. They're stylized. There's minimal detail. There's a controller icon used in this particular app that has like a little wire coming off of it, and you can see all the little buttons on it, and it's got a lot of detail. And at very small sizes, it just looks kind of those kind of messed up. It just looks like pixelated and weird. By contrast, like this Xbox controller icon is just very stylized. It doesn't contain all the buttons, but you know what you're looking at when you see it. It's just enough to get the general shape and the gist of it across. There's also consistent line weights. A lot of people will take an icon and just shrink it down and use that in their apps. And very thin lines will become pixelated, and they'll almost look like they're at a 50% opacity or something like that. And the Seago symbol icons, they generally have thicker lines. They're a few pixels thick. So when you shrink them down, they still have some weight to them. And again, consistent margins and paddings around the icons. So if we back to the panorama here, along the right, you can, just by shrinking some of these things down or just changing the colors that are used and just adjusting the shape, eliminating some of the detail, you can really achieve that same consistent icon style, things that are really bold and instantly recognizable, and you don't have to squint at to try and figure out what you're looking at. Last comment about the icons would be over on the right under instructions, under tricks, scores, and calibration. There's the icon shape is like a punch out of the tile instead of a white shape on it. So it's a little hard to look at. Again, it's just inconsistent. Everything else in the every other icon that I'm looking at here is solid white, except for those. I just don't understand why those have a hole in them. And also just the background noise coming through, it just makes it hard to see what I'm looking at. So I just make those solid white. And again, I would just take the Seago symbol set and just kind of study it and just look at all the different icons that are there if you're thinking about making your own custom icons. And just notice some of those. Look at things like corners, see if they're rounded or if they're sharp. Look at lines, how thick or thin lines are in different cases, and try to emulate those same things in your custom icons. So last bit I wanted to talk about this particular panorama was just kind of in general how to approach information hierarchy. So when you're looking at a page or just a portion of it, just an interface or something, these are just some questions to ask as you're deciding what to put on the screen and how to fit it all together. You want to ask, what's the scope of the current interface? What's the most important piece of information? And what's the best way to communicate that important piece of information to the user? So if we dive back into Panorama, and I just want to, yeah, okay, this was a good screen to look at. So diving into the high scores section, just looking on the left side of the screen for a second. There's a few things going on. There's a panel that says recent events, and beside that there's another panel that I forget what it says, but I wondered as soon as I saw that there were multiple panels underneath high scores. I wondered if those can't just be panorama sections themselves. So, call it high scores or call it recent events, whatever you want. Make that heading really contain just the information that's relevant to the heading. Again, just thinking about scope. If we look at recent events and say, okay, that's really what we're going to zoom in on and focus on is recent events. Down at the bottom, there's users that are currently online, like the last strip of this. And that, to me, I'm not sure why that's there, because that's not really a recent event. Maybe they just signed on, and that'd be a line item, like someone just came online or something. But it's not, I wouldn't call it a recent event. So you could make another section called users online or friends or people or something like that. But this section is about recent events, so just make it just about recent events. Looking individually at each one of these strips, you're seeing, just kind of look at the inventory of information we have in each one of them. You're looking at who made the brag or the challenge, and a photo of them, and then the source, whether they came from Facebook or Twitter or something. You're seeing what trick they did, kick flip. You're seeing where it happened, Hill Park. You're also seeing the date and time. So there's a lot going on here, and if you look at it, when I looked at it originally, I was like, I could barely even tell what am I supposed to be looking at? Like, what's the most important piece of information here? And also, I had a little bit of trouble telling what what pieces of information were associated with each other. The only thing dividing these sections up is a very thin gap between them. Otherwise, it just looks like a big green block with a lot of stuff going on. So I would think about, if we move over to the right side of the screen, these are just some comps that I did just to kind of bring some of the things I've been talking about together to give you kind of an example of how this screen could be a little bit more easy to understand. I think that the person who did the trick and the trick that they did, in my opinion, those are like the most important things. Those are the things that I want to know. You might, as a developer, think, oh, actually the location is more important, and you might want to flip things around and make the location larger and the trick smaller, or whatever. But I'm just, for the purposes of this, I'm saying the photo or the profile image and the trick are important. Also, the trick is important in the context of where it took place. So the location is also part of that line, but I made it a little bit smaller. So you can see the trick and where it happened. And underneath, I've got their actual username and the time and date. And it's not, so the point of saying what's most important and what's least important is so that the most important things, you make those really stand out. You make the text a little bit bigger. The least important things, you still provide the information, but you just provide it smaller and underneath, and it's just kind of an afterthought. And the last thing is just providing ample space between these items so you can tell what are individual blocks of information from each other, so it doesn't get all crammed together and you can't tell what's associated with what. Over on the right is just an inverted version of that. If you just had a light theme and a dark theme, then this might be how it turned out. Where the first item on the white, the 360 flip, and it's got the green tile, that's just an example of how I think you might want to handle challenges. And you might want to do a similar thing with brags. In some way, use an icon. Brag could be the megaphone, whereas challenge could be like a little flag or something. Whatever, you'd be able to come up with something that's more makes more sense with sort of skater culture. But I would recommend using icons and colors to set stuff off. Excuse me, set stuff off. So here I'm saying, instead of just the name, I'm saying it's a challenge by the name of the person. So some things to think about. I hope, whether or not you follow these exact design suggestions, I would ask yourself some of these questions on a large scale about the panorama. What's the first thing that I want to show in the panorama? What's the second thing I want to show? But also when you zoom in, every time you zoom in to an area and say, okay, this section I'm going to worry about for the next 10 minutes, what's the scope? What's the most important piece of information? And the best way to communicate. The best way to communicate, what I mean by that is it text? Is it an icon? Is it a photo? Don't be limited to just whatever you pulled from the data or whatever icons are available in the Seego set. You can make your own and be a little creative with that. So there's this page is I'm not sure if calibration is a misspelling of calibration or if that's some skater lingo that I'm unaware of, but this is a screen where you're basically setting up that device. The device is attached to your board, and before you go out and do tricks, and the accelerometer can pick up what the board was doing, you just need to calibrate it. So I kind of got a little bit of an explanation from the developer of what's going on the screen. I still don't perfectly understand it, to me that says either I'm really naive when it comes to skateboarding, or it means that the screen just could use a little bit more instruction or help. So I would consider adding a little help button on the screen or some instruction of like, am I supposed to do something here, or just verify that the levels look good, or do I do something to the device? I'm just not 100% sure. And maybe that's obvious. Maybe the device comes with a manual and that's not needed. But down below where it says response detecting 6 sigma coefficient, I'm not sure if those are just kind of like a status. Like maybe they just require better labeling. Like maybe it says, detecting means it's currently working. I'm not sure. Is that a good thing? I don't know. and then if there's if those are actually a label for the graph, like you know, it actually tells me something based on how high and low these blue bars are, that label should be down there or above the graph or something. It was just not, I'm not getting a lot of information out of it just from a user interface perspective. The other thing I would say about the screen is it has a graphic EQ look with the little blue lines. But if you wanted more of like a Windows Phone look, you know, I think solid bars would be more along those lines. Again, just kind of less noise and more simplicity. But that's just a really minor detail. So the splash page for this app, I think the icon itself is pretty cool. You know, bright colors, high contrast. I can tell that they're skaters. The title of it, Skateboard Skill Checker, a couple weird things going on there. One is I don't know why it's there twice, if it's just supposed to be like some sort of drop shadowy type effect. It's not very subtle. It just looks like the title's in there twice by mistake. So yeah, I mean, I think you can do creative things on the screen. They look very similar. They're the same size. They're almost the same brightness. The gradient of the purple on the text is, I would just go with a solid purple color. It almost looked to me like, I think when stuff is really subtle like that, it can almost look like something's wrong with your display, like the LCD's, you know, warped, or you've got a smudge on it or something like that. It's really subtle. So I don't know, just something to think about. The third line, gadget best matching and only, I think it might just be a language barrier thing, but I would rephrase that to just be, you know, I would suggest, I don't know, the one and only skate tracker, or the one and only trick checker, or something like that. If that's, you know, a good place for a tagline or something like that. Something that just reads better in English. I just want to take a moment to plug the Windows Phone Bootcamp. I mentioned this last week, but it's pretty good. I'll sit on the screen for a second in case you want to write this down. You can also search for Windows Phone Bootcamp on Channel 9 and find it pretty easily. But it's a series of videos, and they're set up in order, so you can hop over to, you can watch them in order. You know, it kind of starts with the basics of design and then ramps up to talking about controls and technical things. Or if you're interested in searching for keywords like APIs and controls and whatnot, you can kind of just jump right to a video that interests you. So this is the Windows Phone Design Bootcamp, if you want to check it out. The second app we're going to look at is called All Square. This app is for basically for friends who are going on a trip or something, and they want to keep track of how much they're all contributing to various things on the trip. I know I would find this app really useful. I just went on a trip to North Carolina last year, and we all had, you know, one of our friends, you know, paid for all the gas, and another one paid for all the food, and we just had to figure it all out later with a bunch of receipts. So this app helps you keep track of everything. So high level, you can see what the different, you know, trips or events are. And I think this screen is pretty straightforward. You can see the name of the event and who participated in it by picture. So it's pretty obvious. It's clear, straightforward. I don't know if the link, like the hyperlink looking thing underneath it, shows summary. I don't know if that's necessary. I think you can just tap on the item itself or any of the pictures and jump into it. If you wanted to make it more obvious that these were interactive elements, you could use a circle button or something, but the hyperlink is kind of odd, just kind of tacked on the end there. So the second screen of this app is looking at a particular event and looking at the transfers that happen. So this is people who are, you know, they either paid for something themselves or they traded money between themselves. This is another similar screen to this where it's actually money exchanging hands directly between people. This is more focused on just maybe like a product that someone bought, or tickets to somewhere that one person paid for, or something like that. So I think this is pretty straightforward. I mean, the most important things are what was the item, how much money was involved, and then secondarily, the date that it happened and all the people who were involved in the transaction. There's ample padding between each one of these items. I think it's pretty clear. It's pretty obvious. The only thing I would suggest is maybe underneath here it says the people that were involved, Clive for all, Fiona for Clive. I think that it might be kind of interesting if, I don't have like, I think it might be kind of interesting if if there was a little profile photo beside each one. So I had a graphic, and I don't know what happened to it, but it was just a little profile image, and then an arrow pointing to who the money went to. Or so, like for Clive and Fiona, you'd see a picture of Clive and then an arrow and a little picture of Fiona, and their names next to the pictures. If it's going for Clive for all, it's a picture of Clive and then an arrow and then a little icon of like 2 or 3 people, just a silhouette of the person, like the bust, little shoulders and the head. I think that might be easier to just see at a glance instead of having to read the names. You could just see the profile photos and get an idea what kind of activity is going on that way. So diving into the item details, this is if you tapped on one of those individual items. You can see and modify all the information. So there's a lot of flexibility here. You can see who contributed, if people contributed an equal amount. You can check these boxes, and it kind of, if you update one of these boxes, the other ones update with the same amount. It's just sort of kind of locks them all in. So a couple of things I might recommend here is I might recommend the dollar amount and the label paid or received. I might put those on the same line and make them a little bit bigger. It seems like that's a pretty important piece of information. Just the total of all of these numbers. So I might make it a little bit larger. I don't know if these inputs on the top, the name of the item and the date and the currency, you might just want to make those like text inputs like these down here, like the numbers. Just might be more clear that that's an area that you can type in. The last thing I was going to suggest about this particular page was the checkbox where it says equal amount. Whenever I see something like that where every line it's repeated, it's the same thing, equal amount, equal amount, equal amount. I wonder if there's a way that we can kind of simplify that. And so I might consider making some space on the right side of each one of those lines. So you see the 2 numbers, and then there's a little space to the right where you can put like a toggle icon. So I think if you're using like Photoshop or something like that, if you want to link layers together, it's a little link icon. It looks like a chain. It looks like a couple of links of a chain. So that's a kind of a common UI element to say that these fields are all linked together. They're all kind of attached to each other. If you do something to one, it's going to affect the other. So you could kind of use a toggle button to do that. But that's really the only suggestion I might have for this screen. I think it's pretty clear. Yeah. App we're going to look at is called My Stocks Portfolio Plus. So this is it's a stock tracking app. It's got secondary tile support, so you can pin stocks to your tiles and see particular updates as the data is coming in. That's what I'm mostly focused on looking at in this app is because there's a lot going on here, and there's even the individual stock tiles where it's just one stock in the value. It's still kind of busy. There's kind of a lot going on. So I wanted to kind of zoom in on these. You can see MSF, S&P 500. Kind of want to talk about those for a second. First thing was there's an icon for like this little kind of triangle. It's almost like a Star Trek badge deal. This is typically used for navigation, even though it looks like an arrow. It's typically used for navigation and like compass. It's almost like a compass needle. If you're doing something that's supposed to represent a direction, like something going forward or backward or up or down, I would recommend using the arrows. It's just more consistent with other directional icons on the phone. I wanted to just reference, if you're choosing a tile template, this is a good link. It talks about not just, this is just a link from MSDN that I've sent through Bitly, but it talks only not just about the tiles you have available, but how to choose between them. It gives you good scenarios and bad scenarios. So if you're thinking about using a particular tile, you can kind of read those and just do a little bit of a check to see if you're using the right tile template. The second I thought was interesting is the flip template design spec. So this is the tile where you can put like a photo or something on one side and it'll flip over to show more detail on the back. That might be something interesting for this particular app to use a flip. Maybe show at a glance some information and then it flips over to show more detailed information about a particular stock. Just something to think about. You have more options with secondary tiles, and I want to revisit what this developer had done and kind of take all the same information but just present it in a little bit cleaner of a way. So these are just some ideas. These are some mock-ups I did. And if you kind of go back to what I was saying earlier about the Skate app, if you think about information hierarchy, what's the most important piece of information? The stock and the value. So we make that really big. And then secondly, the actual change that's happened most recently, and then the date. I've done all of them. The differences from what the developer had already is I've aligned everything left. That's a pretty consistent theme on the phone, is aligning everything left. It's easier to read. You don't have to dart your eyes around to search for stuff. I've also brought the name of the stock and the value closer together. So it's just a little, at a glance, you can see the stock and the value. And then if you want to dig into it more, you can. I'm also using color to represent the, whether it's gone up or down most recently. The designer did this in the comp that I just showed you, but it was kind of watermarked. It was kind of faded back. And so these are some ways to do it that are a little bit more bold, and I think will help people see at a glance what the stock activity is like. And they, instead of maybe adding another element that clutters or cramps the content, this kind of just correlates with it, by using color to correlate between the arrow and the actual change in value. So yeah, just some ideas. And you could use, you could invert some of these tiles if you wanted to do black with white text or something differently. I think they'll be a little bit cleaner. Oh, the thing I wanted to reference about the flip tile template was, if you delve into any one of those template designs, you can see not just how to use it, but also the design that the original designers used, whoever made the templates. You can see the padding that they used and the font sizes that they used and how they determined to size icons and elements within the tile. So if you're going to do your own custom layout, you want to make sure that you follow those same rules about good padding on the edge of the tile, and just good use of the Seago type Seago font stack. You don't have to make everything bold for it to be visible. That's fine. Another thing I wanted to say about this, a lot going on in this particular app, and I could probably spend more time on it, but there's just a lot of data, and it's one of those apps that's really challenging to fit a lot of stuff on the screen because all this information is really useful, but you don't want it to feel cramped or cluttered. So a couple things I would say about this page. For the most part, I think it's pretty good. I would say the background. In the background, there's like a, I don't think it's a gradient, but it's like a very faint line. I don't know if you all see it on your screens, but it's a very faint line. I think it's like a couple of layers of shading that are in the background, and it's probably there just to add some interest. The designer probably thought it was a little bit boring not having a background, but I would contend that it actually adds a little bit of noise and distraction. I also think, like, if you do something really subtle like this, it sometimes looks better on a screen, but then once you actually get it on a device, it looks a little weird. Like you're trying to make something. It almost looks like you're giving something a shine that's already shiny. So it's like, I would recommend getting rid of that. I would recommend using background colors in this area. I'm sorry, I'm using my mouse to point at stuff. I don't know if you can see it. In the table where the labels and the values are, right there's a lot of numbers, and it's not immediately apparent that, for example, low and 30.62 are correlated with each other. There's a lot of distance between them. So you can imagine if you encapsulated each one of those, if you used kind of like a traditional table layout, and you either made a grid, like literally a grid, or you just encapsulated each one of those rows in its own little very light gray box or something like that, you would get the impression of a grid of information. So just, yeah, something to just kind of split up that area a little bit more and make the labels and the values correlate together visually. Next app we're going to look at is called On the Go. This one it's a social media aggregator, so gets all your updates from friends on different social networks and puts them all in one place. So there's a screen where you can pick your social networks and stuff. I'm diving right into the Facebook screen. So it gets all your friends, and you can say whether or not you want to get notifications for them. So a couple things about the screen. One I would say is that the Facebook logo looks stretched, and it also is, it's kind of weird that it's in this very tight box. Most logos have rules on how much padding you want to add around the logo, similar to the way the icons work on tiles. It'll look cramped if you don't add enough margin in between the actual logo itself and the background that it's on. So I would either get this Facebook logo may have just been pulled off of the website, but you can probably find one that will look a little bit better, and you can scale up proportionally to this screen. You might also consider using an inverse of the logo, like the blue Facebook on a white background, so it kind of blends in a little bit better. Or you can make the whole background for this screen blue, or make a banner along the top. There's a lot of things you can do. Right now, it just looks kind of tossed in and stretched and kind of weird. The other thing about this screen is that I think the rectangles between the off and the name are toggle buttons. So you know, red, I actually don't know what the status means. It looks like if I look at the labels, yeah, so off is white and then red is on. There's a toggle button, there's like a toggle switch that you can use. You can see it in a lot of settings pages. Sorry, I don't have an example of it right now, but it looks similar to what you see here, except that there's like a little handle on each switch that you can toggle back and forth from the right to the left. So I'd recommend using that. And otherwise, I would also consider including pictures of the people if that's possible with whatever API you're using. Might be easier just to find people at a glance with those photos, profile photos. Similar comments on this status page where you could just kind of see all the statuses of different people. If you can, include a picture of each person. I think the photo, you want to know times what the source of the information is, you know, Twitter or Facebook, but I think it's a picture of the person and knowing who it's coming from is just very people-centric, and that's generally what people care more about. I might include the logo a little bit smaller, the source logo, Facebook, Twitter, a little bit smaller underneath the message with the date. You know, you can say like 5 minutes ago, that type of date marker on it, so you can just see those details. They're not quite as important, but you want to know where something came from and where it came, you know, when it came, just after the information about the person and their message. Other than that, pretty straightforward. Next app that we're going to look at is called QuickNote. So this is a note-taking app. It's like a notepad app. It's got some interesting functionality. You can also record messages, like audio messages. And so we're going to dive into that one. So the first screen we're going to look at is called My Notes. So this is just a list of all the notes that you have saved. And there's an icon that you can, and a color that you can choose for each one, which is kind of cool, because if you could choose kind of like a work theme if you wanted for some notes, or, represent with a CD, maybe a list of songs that you like or something like that. So that's a pretty cool option. The icons I might add a little bit more padding between the icons and the little tiles themselves. But this screen's pretty straightforward. I might also consider sorting options. You could add it as an app bar control on the bottom. There's a sort icon that's like an arrow up and an arrow down. Maybe so you could give the user the option to sort by name or sort by how recently they updated it, just to get a little more options. I could see the screen once you had 50 notes, it getting a little bit out of control. Jumping into the next screen, this is where you would actually edit the note. So I don't know what the character limit is on the title of this screen, but if it's quite large and it's running off the screen, I'd consider making it a little bit small, making the text a little bit smaller and wrapping it. You wouldn't want to reduce the amount of space you have to actually write the note, but it's just cropping something off is oftentimes a cue that you can pan to the right, like in a panorama. You have a really big title on the top, and it goes off to the side, and that's a cue for the user that they know there's more stuff over there, and they can pan over. And I don't think that's the case here. It's actually just being cut off, and that's all you get. So about the actual area where you can edit the note. I would just, it doesn't feel very editable to me. It kind of just looks like a big tile. So a couple of suggestions there. I think there's a couple of directions you can go in. One is to actually make it look more like a typical text area. So in this scenario, it would probably have a gray background, and it would probably have just a typical black Seago text, and it just looks like most other text inputs that are on the phone. The other direction you could go in is to make it feel, if you wanted to add some personality and make it a little bit more unique, you could make it feel a little bit more like an actual notepad. So, give it like a light yellow background and like a handwritten font, like maybe Seago script, just to give it more of that like old-fashioned notepad feel. I generally don't like imitating, things that are in the physical world when we can make something a lot more usable on the phone and cleaner and easier to read. But those are just kind of two directions that you could go in. Right now, the serif font, it almost looks like a mistake, like when you're looking at a website and someone forgets to style the Times New Roman default font. And the accent color background, it doesn't scream, hey, you can edit this to me. The next is where you can actually audio. This is recording an audio note instead of making a text note. So I was wondering, you can see in the center of the screen where the time is ticking up as the recording is going. And I wondered if we could have that's useful to see the length of the recording. I wondered if there's some other visualization that we could have, like if you're streaming in the audio right now, if you could tap into the audio activity, the mic activity, and you could actually, I don't think it has to be complicated like an EQ, like a graphic EQ, but even just something that just kind of was a little bar or something that just told you that sound was being received. I know sometimes when I record something with any kind of app, the first thing I do is hit record, and then I kind of tap on the microphone just to make sure that it's working. And I can imagine if I was recording a particularly long note, I want to have some sort of visual feedback to know that my recording is sounding good and the levels are good. There's not too much noise around me. So if you could do some sort of visualization of the audio coming in, I think it could be really simple. I think that could be really useful, though. The background of this I think it's supposed to be reminiscent of a microphone, or look, to me it feels more like a speaker in a car or something like that. And oh, my eyes are kind of going crazy looking at it. It's such an interesting texture. But I just wanted to throw a different kind of angle at the designer. This was what I did for Ask Ziggy. It's an app that you can give it voice commands and it'll go out on the internet and find information for you. But I wanted to do something that had a Windows Phone feel, that had this feeling of the iconography of the phone, but that was an illustration and made something just kind of feel unique and have a centerpiece for the phone or for the app. So I took a photo of a vintage microphone and I traced it in illustration, and then I just imported that into Blend. And I would consider going down this route if you're thinking about spicing up your application. Instead of adding something in that's like an image, a photo of something that exists in real life, instead do an illustration of it. I just think they kind of have a lot more personality and feel a lot more fitting with how sharp and clean and clear everything is on the phone. Of this note-taking app is where you can, for a particular note, you can customize a secondary tile for it. So this gives you a lot of options. And I wonder, so it gives you options on how you align the text. I think it's like a text preview of the note. You can adjust the font size. You can choose a color. I wonder if some of these options are maybe too many for the user. Like the right aligned text, to me, it doesn't look great. Like we read left to right. So, and most tiles, the text on them is aligned left. So I wonder if we could just say the text is always aligned left. I don't know. Maybe we don't need to give the user the option of making something look weird. When we can say, as designers, we know what looks best. Just always do that. Same thing with the font size. I might just choose. It might be interesting to simplify that into like a small, medium, large sort of option instead of the slider. It's sometimes hard to be precise with a slider, and I don't know that we need that much precision with giving a preview of a note on a tile like this. There might be certain options that you find are always look the best, and you just kind of always just offer those best looking options to the user. I also wanted to just suggest that I'm trying to understand here. It says there's a voice note, or this is a voice note on the tile, and I don't know if that's. I think that's what it says, and if you don't have it, if it's not a text note, it does that instead. Okay, I think that makes sense. So I would consider maybe making a small icon to represent that it's a sound. So like a little speaker or a little microphone icon or something like that, like in the corner. It just might be, or maybe even default the icon itself, like the main icon, to be that microphone or speaker, to just represent what kind of note it is without having to read a sentence. I also wonder, like, if you want to provide a preview of the note in this area, it might be best to just have. You can still choose an icon for the note itself, but for the secondary tile, I might recommend just choosing between an icon with no preview or the preview with no icon. I feel like there's a lot of scenarios where the text is going to run over the icon and it's just going to look weird and broken. So I might just streamline some of these options, say, look, we know the 2 or 3 scenarios where this tile is going to be readable and it's going to look good, and just give the user those options. Last app we're going to look at is it's a geocaching app or similar. The reason I say or similar is because I think this particular developer is doing something other than geocaching, but it's very similar to geocaching with it. I think they have some sort of custom idea that they are being a little secretive about. So that's cool. We're going to just treat this like a geocaching app and offer some feedback on it. So on this first screen, this is sort of the main pivot. I didn't get a preview of what the other screens are, so I'm just going to focus on this one. These are nearby geocaches, and there's a little tiny map up in the corner where you can see where you are, and then there are some Yeah, so there are just a list of nearby caches. And there's some options where if you were to tap the app bar button in the middle, it looks like a little map, you would dive into a full screen map experience, and you could tap on any one of these individual caches and get more detail about it. Just need a drink. So if we dive into looking at the map screen here, you can see that this is a lot more informative in terms of the location, but I can't see anything about any of the individual locations on the map. And the developer mentioned this. He's like, I've got all this information I want to convey. I don't really know what to focus on. And so I wanted to kind of back out for a second. I recommend that you do this is think about your user scenarios. So you want to think about the most important use cases, not about necessarily features or how you're going to develop it or what controls or APIs you're using or even what the layout is like. Just what the user wants to do and why they want to do it. So these are scenarios. The developer will have to decide for himself if these apply, but I think for geocaching, I would find these to be useful. The user reads about nearby items in order to choose the most interesting. So sometimes with geocaching, the name of it will be like Pirate's Booty or something like that, and that sounds interesting as opposed to just geocache number 2. So you'd want to see a detail like that. Second scenario, user sees nearby locations on a map in order to compare the ease of access. So you might know some things, these 2 caches are half a mile away, but this one is like in the ocean. It's important for me to know that I don't have to go swim to it. So the map and how interesting the nearby items are the 2 use cases. Now, generally, you can take these use cases and turn those into separate interfaces, and this is how you judge whether or not you're on the mark with the interface. You say, does it satisfy a user with these desires? It's very easy when you're developing an app to get caught up in all the features you're incorporating, but this keeps you honest. The other thing you can do is if you have scenarios like this and you say, I really feel like these are going on at the same time. I'm making a decision about what cache I'm going to go to next based partly on the location and also partly on how interesting it is. So is there a way I could combine these? So here's something this is very similar to the location screen of the skating app we looked at earlier. It's also similar to Local Scout. You got a little map along the top and then a list of locations down below. And you've got enough. You just want to make sure that both of those users, if you're going to do a combination like this, both of those user scenarios are satisfied. We've got enough screen real estate for the map so that we can really identify where we are, surrounding landmarks, that sort of thing, and then enough screen real estate down below where I can see a few of the locations, and then I can start scrolling through them if I want to. I've got the most critical information, big and bright, the name of it, and also some critical information like how far away it is. That's also pretty important. I want to have that in there too. So you don't always have to have all of the information crammed onto one screen. You don't always have to have 10 items all on one screen, but you want to make sure that the key scenarios are satisfied and that you reveal the most important information and make that really obvious and clear. So that's it for today. Wow, 5 minutes to spare. Thank you all for your submissions, or some really interesting apps this week. And the next session will be a week from today.